Hi, I'm KD Cureton, an indie author who not so recently debuted my breakout novel, Cracked Ice, a spicy dark hockey romance and prequel in the Fucked Up Player series.
Welcome to Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. This is a soft space to explore romance in books where no topic is too taboo. I'm your host, Casey, and this week I am sitting down with author KD Cureton to talk about her viral debut novel, Cracked Ice. One of the reasons that I loved Cracked Ice is that it flips the stalker trope on its head, and our FMC, Sydney Sinclair, is the stalker. She's also one of my favorite FMCs of 2025. We'll also talk about Katie's brilliant banter and inner monologues, why she fought so hard to keep the riskiest scenes in her book, and which authors inspired her to take the leap into publishing her books. Katie also wrote a really beautiful love letter to her readers that you won't want to miss. So Katie, welcome to the Love Letters and Books podcast. I am so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited.
I could not wait to interview you because I remember as soon as I closed your book, Cracked Ice, I thought to myself, what does it take to read an over 600-page book in one sitting? And I knew I had to talk to you because I did exactly that. I could not put this book down. So we're just going to dive right in and have you tell us a little bit about your debut novel, Cracked Ice.
Cracked Ice is about Sydney Sinclair. She is a figure skater and she is from this predominantly wealthy family that's well known. Basically, we start the story out where she's panicking because she's lost figure skating. She's not one of those rich girls who likes being from this predominantly wealthy family. She's wants to forge her own path, fight for her own future, but that future has just been taken away from her. So now she's panicking because if there's anything else that she could fight for and that she wants, it's her first crush, which is something she's not been allowed to have before now. So we walk in on her trying to get to this hockey game so she could see her hockey crush, which turns out to be Lucian Morningstar Morrow. He is ruthless. He is unhinged, but he's a fantastic hockey player. Everyone loves him. We walk in, we see everyone shouting his name, rooting for number 66. And she's just excited that even though she's lost all this stuff, in the very beginning of the book, she gets to finally see him and then hopefully meet him because this is her last night. Once she's done with figure skating, she has to leave, go back home to where she is actually from, which in this case is California. But of course, that does not go according to plan. She meets him and he's like, oh, I know exactly who you are. You're the girl that's been stalking me. And that just kicks off the whole story because she's like, oh no, he didn't think that he would know that it was her. And then we finally start to learn how these two meeting started to unfold.
That is a perfect summary. And one of the things that really stands out to me about your book is the structure. So I don't mean to nerd out too quickly at the beginning of this episode, but it was such an interesting creative choice to start the reader off at this really heightened moment of unhinged, spiraling, just tension ready to explode moment of Sydney almost hunting down her crush and him revealing that he kind of knows who she is. So I would love to pick your brain about this because that is such a bold choice. And this is your debut novel. What made you want to start us off at that point, the most explosive point in their experience so far?
First, I want to say I am really happy that you're saying it's an explosive point. Some people, they've said, oh, it starts off kind of like a slow burn, but it really is the most explosive point. I don't think that even everyone gets like how high her anxiety and nerves are in this moment. She's lost everything.
Mhm.
We're being told that, but we also see it with her nail biting, with her rapid pace of walking and ignoring everyone around her to get to him. And so it's one of my favorite parts of the story. And I always knew I was going to do it that way. It's a book where the timeline is very short. It all happens in one night. So I knew one, I had to dive directly into the story, into the thick of it. But I also wanted to paint a bit of a picture beforehand. Like we need to first understand a little bit about how Sydney is portrayed and then who she thinks she actually is. And I just love how throughout the story, we learn more about the difference, basically, or the gap in how she sees herself and how the rest of the world sees her because she's completely ignorant to it.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And I think that's very interesting that you share that people had a little bit of a different response. It was so fun to read this book, to just open, not really know much about you as a writer, to dive into this story where from the first moment on the first page, you're completely tense, just wondering, is this girl about to snap in front of all of these people? You're wondering, what is she about to do? And I just thought it was so beautifully done, and like I said, I sat down thinking, "Oh, I'll flip through a little bit, maybe I'll read it tomorrow," and I could not put it down until I was at the last page. So, you might have written one of my favorite FMCs of the entire year. Sydney Sinclair is everything I did not know that I needed. She is sweet and a little scary and unhinged, and her internal monologue is just chef's kiss. So let's talk a little bit about Sydney. What inspired you to write this character? What do you love about her? And what about her drives you crazy?
So, what inspired me to write Sydney was actually my first book. So I wrote a book before this one that I never published. It was my first hand at really trying to write and see if this was something that I could do and explore the passion of possibly one day publishing. And at that time, I had written a character who was also very flawed. And it was very hard for me to market her. She was very complicated and she had a lot of issues, and for lack of a better word, she was a little bit broken, like a broken character. And I did not want to, like, move forward with publishing that book ultimately just because it hit a little close to home, and it wasn't how I wanted to introduce myself as an author. But I realized after writing, again, the second book first and how flawed Sydney was in that series, I said, "Oh, I'm going to have to explain her in the prequel. So that way I don't fall into the same trap of writing a broken character that's hard to love." Because in book two, it was almost like Sydney was, I don't want to say irredeemable, but a lot of her choices didn't make sense. So in Cracked Ice, when I finally decided to write her, I was like, we have to really dive and explain why she is this way. And I knew I wanted to present her in one way and then have us, the audience, learn about her. So that way we can accept some of the mistakes and choices that she makes. What I love about her is her willingness to go after what she wants, no matter what. I just think we have a lot of stalker romances where it's the male, right? Who's like unhinged and chasing after the girl, and we're like swooning, and we love that. But women, we can be very ambitious people. And I really feel like if a woman were to put her mind to the same things that a man would, I really feel like we would like one up. And I do think that even though Sydney is this unhinged character, she's not your typical unhinged character, but she's an unhinged character in the way like, wow, she really went there. She really
Yep.
did these things in pursuit of this thing that she really, really wants. As far as how she drives me crazy, though I admire the way she goes after what she wants, she can be a little obtuse. Like, I love her, but she can definitely be selfish. she can be so single-minded that she doesn't understand her actions and how they affect others. And that, that's shown later on in the book without giving too much away of how she even interacts with her teammates and what ultimately ends up happening with her being kicked off the team is her just lack of awareness when she's so in her head about what it is she's trying to do. She's not careful with her actions and how they affect people.
It's an interesting thing, the lack of awareness, because in some characters, you wonder, is it their feeling of powerlessness, or they feel like, I don't have a choice, or I can't do this, so nothing I'm going to do is really going to affect people in the real world. And I always wonder about that, if it's almost a core wound on some level where they have been dismissed or not treated like they had agency in their life. And so there's almost this disruption in reality where they're like, "Oh, my actions affect other people. This isn't a TV show I'm in. This is my actual life." And it's really interesting to see how Sydney's a little detached from the consequences of her action or how it might really affect people, even in her relationship with Lucian and how much she's willing to share and disclose about what's actually going on. There's almost this dismissive energy of the consequences that are about to come.
Yeah, she sees this as her final opportunity. And quite frankly, throughout the whole book, her choices are selfish and she's making them willingly
Mhm.
because in her mind, it's almost like she deserves it. She's losing everything. Why not have the one other thing I want?
Yeah.
And, we forget too that, like, even though she wants to renounce her name as a Sinclair and her father, who we all know is terrible, she's still that girl. She's still raised in that world. And her privilege shows, even when she's really trying to like fight against it. I think she's completely unaware of how her privilege has skewed her mind and thinking.
Yeah. I love how you said that women are very ambitious. And if a man could do this, women could probably do it so much more intensely. And I think it's really interesting how you're taking almost a trope or a character dynamic that is so wildly popular in the genre and almost spinning it on its head and putting the main female character in that role of the unhinged stalker who's willing to do anything to get what she wants and how that could be perceived very differently. So, what was your thought process as you're writing and putting out this book? Is Sydney being received and perceived the way you wanted her to be? Is she being loved by the readers, even though she has some pretty irredeemable qualities, which we're pretty accepting of with the main male characters, but people tend to be a little harder on the main female characters?
Exactly. She is everything I wanted her to be. And even more so because I remember, again, like with me writing the second book first, I remember there was like a moment where Lucian is saying his sweet, innocent Sydney. And I remember like writing Cracked Ice and finishing it and then thinking to myself, oh, that's funny because now I know in book 2 that he's being sarcastic. When I wrote it, I had no idea he was being sarcastic. But then I wrote Cracked Ice. I'm like, wow, yeah, he's being sarcastic. She's not sweet and innocent. She portrays herself that way. She wants to be that way. But like she is this unhinged character. And I knew I wanted it to be almost psychological because obviously, Lucen being a man, she's not gonna be able to, like, physically overpower him in a lot of ways. So, her psychological ways in which she made choices and then taunted him and then wanted to do X, Y, and Z just to get his attention, even though she has no idea what she wants to do with that attention because she's never been allowed
Yeah.
to have a guy or a person that's all her own. All her relationships and dates have come from her dad. So this is also her first try at human connection that wasn't set up for her. And I just love how we see that unfold and how she becomes the Sydney we know and love. And I think people were able to accept her as that. Like you said, she has some irredeemable qualities, but I think a lot of people resonated with Sydney because, I mean, we all kind of have irredeemable qualities, right? Especially when we're doing things for the first time. I think another thing to note is they're in college. Sydney's young. She's experiencing a lot of firsts, not just, sexually, but like mentally. And I think even though Lucian obviously steals the show, he's the most beloved. I do think a lot of people accept Sydney, and that's exactly what I wanted. I needed people to accept her so that way when book two comes out, they can understand why she's doing some of the things she's doing. Because she's grown, but she is still a little bit selfish.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Lucian as a character because he is very complex. He's got quite a backstory, and we learn so much about him in this night of chaos that they embark on. And at every stage throughout the night, you think there can't be any more. And then there's just another layer that gets pulled back. So tell us a little bit about Lucian from your perspective.
Cracked Ice is a prequel to a Why Choose Romance. So he was the first person to speak to me. Before Sydney even spoke to me, Lucian spoke to me first. And he is a person who I know it's so weird to say, loves love. Like he loves this idea of connection. He's actually probably the most romantic of all the characters. We see a little bit of what he does. Like he takes her on a date and he's going through all of these like trials and games because he wants her to have this great experience. Like he's rooting for her to have this awesome time without scarring her mentally. He has no problem doing it physically, but mentally, he does ultimately want her to enjoy everything that they're doing. And I think to me, I wanted him to, yes, be like the fun loving psycho, but I did not want him to be crazy and unhinged for the sake of being crazy and unhinged. And from the moment I started writing him, he was never that way. I always knew that like there was purpose and reasoning behind his and a lot of those actions come from a place of care.
It's so interesting that you say that, and we were able to see that in his actions and his choices at so many crossroads throughout the book. And one of the key ones that really stood out to me was the interactions he had with Trevor, who is a beloved side character, but also the interactions that Lucian, Sydney, and Trevor have all together. That was such an interesting part of the story because you see another side to Lucian and his relationships and his life before Sydney. And so when I think about the dynamic between the three of them, some things really stand out to me. And one of them is the level of trust that was fostered so quickly in that bedroom, in that room that they're in when Sydney finally emerges from the closet. There is this experience that takes over. And I thought it was really interesting because Sydney, as a character, does not seem like a person who has a lot of trust in her relationships. And here comes Trevor, who she doesn't really know. She's right off the bat, Sydney, right? Having a very Sydney reaction of, who is this? What are they doing? She's still her stalker self. And yet, very quickly, the connection between the three of them unfolds in this really powerful, organic way. So, can you touch on maybe Trevor as a character or that dynamic that gets fostered between the three of them?
I want to say that even though Sydney is distrusting, both Sydney and Lucian actually are very distrusting people. But if you remember right before that scene, there's the knife throwing scene, right? And he asks her, like, do you trust me? And she's like, does it matter? And I think that part is so important because I think after that experience is when the trust really started to build. between her and Lucian.
Mhm.
And I think, again, that's why her reaction was so visceral when Trevor comes in. But then Lucian, who we know is also a very distrusting person, immediately just has all this trust in Trevor. Sydney sees it as, oh, I can trust him by proxy.
Yes.
Because Lucian trusts him so much, he must be a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
And also, I think she has a good idea of who's not trustworthy. Like the people who her family surrounds themselves with in Bradford, she knows what untrustworthiness looks like. And I think immediately when Trevor's introduced, even in the very beginning, he's introduced as this character with the caramel voice and the sweet puppy eyes. And he's just someone who you immediately feel comfortable around and who's very genuine.
Yeah.
And I think that shows in those scenes. Trevor's genuine care for Lucian's well-being, as well as Sydney's, is I think probably what makes it so easy to get past the jealousy that she felt in that moment and just embrace him for what he is, which is someone who Lucian trusts and who I can trust to help guide me in this situation. Because again, she's naive. She has no idea what she's doing, how to make Lucian happy. We know as his stalker, she just wants him to be happy. Even if she goes about it in the most insane way, she cares about him. She wants him to enjoy her. And who better to teach her than the person who is already enjoying him? And that's her logic.
Well, Captain was a great teacher. Let's just put it that way. That was an epic scene. So well done. I love that we've been able to dive so deep into Cracked Ice. I remember reading it and just having so many questions for you and wanting to know more about these characters. And I think it was such a powerful setup for the next book. And I would love to know where we're going on this journey with Sydney and Lucian and whoever else from this night of chaos, this, tension and stress and excitement and danger and just wildness that occurs. Where do they go from here in your next book?
Love to talk about it. So, the next book is actually called Black Ice, which plays a lot on some of the pieces of Cracked Ice. If you remember, there was a scene where Beware of Black Ice was made a title. So Black Ice is about them now being in this new school. So we have new school, new rank, new players. And unfortunately, it's not Trevor. Trevor did not leave Bellemere with Sydney and Lucian. So he is not a part of the Why Choose. He's a very important part of their story. And believe me, he will get his own. I promise he will get his happily ever after. But when they go to this new school, which is Fremont University, they move from Washington to Colorado, which it's been heavily implied, but Lucian definitely finds Sydney. We'll put it that way. And they are now partners, skate partners at this school, Fremont University, where Jax Abrams and Kyron DeBarquet are also there. And she is just knows them as her bullies. They've been there 2 years by the start of Black Ice, and in those 2 years, they have experienced all sorts of bullying from Jax and Kyron for what they think is a harmless prank. But then we start to learn more and more about who Jax and Kyron are to Sydney. And then something happens. Of course, there's one terrible night where everything changes. And as a result of that change, we get this whole entire spinoff of what happens between Lucian and Sydney, who at this point are only friends, and their enemies, Jax and Kyron, who are also best friends.
It's really exciting to hear that their journey is going to be so much more layered and that we get to dive back into this universe. And one of the things that really stood out to me so much about your writing in Cracked Ice that I'm now looking forward to in Black Ice is the intense undercurrent. It's the internal monologues. It's the intense back and forth, the banter, the dialogue, the energy that goes on between these characters. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer and why this is something that you focus on in your stories? Because it's done so beautifully. We really get to know these characters through their actions. We're seeing the choices that they make, but you're really inviting us into their psyches and into their hearts and what's motivating them. So tell us just a little bit about your process in writing these characters.
Yeah, for sure. So I've always been a huge proponent for full stories. And, don't get me wrong, I can appreciate a book where the plot is smut or the goal is simple or we're here for a good time, not a long time. But my heart has always laid with a full story where the characters really get to breathe like fine wine and they're meaningful and we understand everyone's motivations, their goals, their actions. I think it just makes them that much more not just lovable, but believable. And sometimes the writer community, it can be taboo to waste prime book real estate on inner monologues. And that makes total sense for like a very action driven plot. And I can completely agree with it. But I think a lot of times in my writing, it's a character driven plot that happens to have action.
Mhm.
And I think with my inner monologues, it's easy for it to feel like the book is moving really fast, right? Like you got the 635 pages because a lot of things and actions are happening, but I never want to lose the characters because ultimately they could be doing anything. It really doesn't matter what they're doing, but I really want the characters' love to be this believable aspect in the story that comes alive. And I don't think that can happen unless you understand them as a person, unless you get inside their heads.
Mhm.
They can be doing something very simple. Actually a line in Black Ice where he's like, "You want to go to a party?" And he's like, yeah. He's just like, "You don't even want to go with me to the grocery store." And it's such a simple line, and my alpha readers, like, love it so much. They're like, "Why is this so funny?" Because I say like, surprisingly real funny
Yeah.
things. You don't even think about it, but, like, as college students, yeah, you gotta go to the grocery store. And, like, you wanna go to a party, we haven't been to the grocery store. You don't go to the grocery store with me. And it's just little things like that where we get these, like, one-off moments, but you can understand why someone who's want to be or spend time with someone would be frustrated that they wouldn't wanna do something as simple as grocery shop together, but you wanna go to a party together. And I just think, like, that's funny, but cute, and we get to understand, okay, if they wanna spend this little bit of time with me doing this thing, it makes the next action when you wanna do something as crazy as, like, have a knife thrown at you way more believable because it's like, "Aw, they totally said that they wanted to spend time together doing the small things, so of course they would do something as dramatic as that together." I think that's, like, how I like to write. It all makes sense in the end, and we can really understand, "Oh, they would not just do this for no reason." Like, we know them. We know why they would do this or why they would make this choice or do this thing that led to whatever ends up happening.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned how taboo it is about highlighting the inner monologues in stories. But I have to say, as the reader, the inner monologues were so histrionic and stressful and so action packed. There is a lot happening inside each of these characters that when we got to the actual present moment action, it was almost like a little relief from the inner turmoil that's going on in this action-packed, highly stressful, really scary, full of first-time experiences that are also really exciting night of chaos that they're embarking on. So it was just really beautifully done, and I was very inspired as a reader and as a creative that you
Oh, that's
chose. Oh
awesome.
my god, I feel like I have to have an entire conversation with you off the podcast about this, but that this was your choice for your debut novel. And I've been watching you obviously from the sidelines as you have launched this book. I feel like it came out in August of 2025, and I've been watching you show up in this space and talk about the book and promote the book. And I'm just kind of in awe of your experience and how people are responding to you, but also that you leaned into the uncomfortable choices at every turn. And I feel like like I said, a reader and as a creative and as a writer, that was really inspiring to me. I feel like any time in the story when there was a moment of like, oh, I could make kind of a safe choice, you were like, absolutely not. We are going in the other direction. And
My editor will tell you. Oh my goodness. Yes, my editor will tell you I had to fight her on some things. Cause in the round two of edit, she wanted to cut some scenes. And I can totally understand why to an editor or just anybody else reading it, it might not feel necessary at the time. But I remember one scene in particular, and it's Lucian on the top of the cliff. She wanted to cut that scene because he has said, "Hey, we already kind of have an understanding of Lucian's mindset." I'm like, "No, we need this scene. It needs to be described what is going on in his head. Like, why would someone like Lucian even like having a stalker? Why would it matter to him?" And I don't think a lot of people realize the helplessness that Lucian feels throughout the book. And I think that moment, though it was very, I will say, hard because, this is like a suicidal ideation that he's having, but it's also like it's said in a way and done in a way in his head where he doesn't even see the seriousness of it because it's just this hard moment where nothing matters to him. And I just think it's when you're talking inner monologue, you can have a character say something or do something, and you can show them doing like the most insane and unhinged things. But unless you really get that inner monologue, you won't know truly what that motivation is. I think the inner monologues humanize Lucian and his unhingedness as well as Sydney. I mean, yes, Sydney is stalking him, and that's bad. But in her mind, I just think the inner monologue where she doesn't see anything wrong with it, like that moment where she the Valentine's Day night, and she's just like, "I just want him to be happy." Like, I'm like, "Wow, that is so creepy," but, like, also, I love it. I love that you love him that much. And the thing is, at that point, she doesn't even see it as love. She just sees it as just I really, really like him, and she doesn't know what to do with those strong feelings.
yeah.
And of course, she ends up doing what she does, but I just think that that inner monologue really puts it together. And at one point, the intermissions did not exist. And I remember thinking to myself, I can say that Sydney's a stalker, and that will probably be pretty cool, that will get people's attention. But unless I really show like how this mental devolving happened, I don't think you're really gonna grasp the level of unhinged she is until you get that backstory. And that's why I had to do it. I had to do it and I loved it. And I'm so glad that I fought for those moments with my editor. And not to say that like he was totally against it either, too. I don't want to say that. I just love that we can have discourse of like, hey, explain to me why it's important to the story. And I was able to do that. And we both agreed, you know what? You're totally right.
Yeah.
And it worked out. And it became what it is today. And people resonated and they loved it. And I was shocked too, like you said, like I'm doing my best to show up, but the amount of love and support that I've gotten for these characters has been unmatched. I love it.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear. That's what I wanted for you as I was reading your book. And I am really inspired. And I would imagine any other debut author watching your journey would feel pretty inspired as well. So I'd love to know about who inspires you. What authors are on your TBR? What are the books you can't wait for? Or what are some of your favorites?
Some of my favorites, that's gonna be really, really hard. But I will say, hands down, all-time favorite, crown goes to Miss Harley LaRue and the Losers Duet. Oh my gosh. That book series is my Roman empire. I love her. I love what she stands for. I love how she writes. I love her characters and her storytelling abilities. I was a huge fan of The Losers. Like, it truly changed what I thought, about writing, and it inspired me a lot because in that series, not a lot actually happens as far as, like, it's not this big actiony type of book. It's really just about the evolving of Jessica and how she falls in love with these 4 boys, and that's the story. Her accepting, loving herself, and then admitting her feelings about these boys and them coming together to create this found family. Love it. Like, when you say it like that, it sounds very simple, but it was the most impactful thing ever, and, yeah, he inspires me on the daily to write how I write. A couple of other authors that do the same, Emily Rath. I've read her Fucking Around series. She was the one who I was like, "Oh, I could totally write a hockey romance." And Lucian just zapped right in my head the moment that I finished reading that book series. And I know, like, a lot of people can, especially with that book, there was a lot of spice, a lot of interesting things that occurred between those 4 individuals. But Emily is a person who taught me in writing, even about spice, you could have world building. I think people associate world building a lot with fantasy, but you can have world building in romance as well. I love the world that she built. The Jacksonville Rays is a beautiful story. And then just a couple to shout out, Ashley Jade and Lauren Blakely. They write 2 different types of genres. Ashley Jade is like a lot of suspense and angst. She wrote The Words and The Devil's Playground duet. And I fell in love with her writing after reading The Words. She writes beautifully, but she creates this like angsty characters. And oh my goodness, she also wrote the Complicated Heart series. Oh, when you're talking about tearing somebody's heart out slowly, but like wanting to root for like the most terrible situations and people, um, and the, like, choices that they make, I totally think that she is someone who inspires me to push the boundaries when it comes to even the worst person or the person who makes the worst mistakes being redeemable and deserving of love. And then Lauren Blakely, she writes a lot of rom-com, but when I tell you, she has the most funny and relatable chemistry in all of her stories. I always believe her characters are in love, and I especially like reading her romances.
Yeah.
I think she's probably the person who single-handedly taught me how to write male on male love and just making that as genuine and as authentic as possible. And yeah, they are my all-stars when I say people who or authors who inspired me.
I love that you shared that. And one of the benefits of this podcast is I get to ask people those questions and just add to my TBR. The Losers was definitely something on my list that I wanted to read. So I'm just, after this conversation, pushing that to the top. And I can't wait to dive into that. I feel like it might give me a better understanding of where you're coming from.
At risk of losing Sydney's spot, I highly recommend. You might love Jessica even more.
Maybe I'll
I
get to
love
it.
her as a character.
Maybe I'll get to it in 2026. So Sydney has my heart in 2025. 2026 might be a whole new FMC. So, Katie, this has been such a beautiful conversation, and I really love that we've been able to explore your work and your characters. But I would love to check in with you because you're in this really interesting phase where you've shared your debut novel, you're working on your next ones, and we're really discovering your voice and who you are. So I'm wondering, is there something you'd like all of us, the listeners, the readers, to know about you as a person, as a writer, as a creative?
Um, well, about me is do know anytime you're reading anything that I've written, I worked my behind off. Because oh wait, can we curse?
Girl, you can say anything you
Saying
want.
behind doesn't even
It's my podcast. You can cuss, you can do whatever you want.
it sounds so weird because I never talk like that in real life. Yeah, I worked my ass off. I worked my ass off to make sure that anytime I am putting something out, it's because I truly believe in it, which is really hard to say because imposter syndrome gets most of us, but I feel like it especially has it out for me sometimes. I do struggle with that, but anytime that I am writing, I am doing my absolute best to make sure that it sounds good, that it's authentic. I'm not being offensive, but I'm being as real and genuine as possible to who I am and to who I believe in and what I believe in, which is that everyone, absolutely everyone deserves love, no matter the mistakes we make, no matter how naive or broken or flawed we are. And I genuinely want that to always be present in my work. I feel like, especially when it comes to women, in my stories, you will probably always find a very flawed character finding love. Like, I don't think I will ever be able to, like, write, like, perfect characters who have the cutest of cute meet cutes and never go through anything too hard. Like, you're probably always gonna be like, "Wow, did he really have to put them through this?" And I'm gonna be like, "I didn't put them through it, that was just their story, and
Yeah,
I'm just here to tell it."
life unfolding on life's terms. And I think it's really relatable as someone who is deeply human, deeply flawed, probably has several irredeemable sides to myself. I love what you're saying about those characters always deserving that love and connection, and it's not reserved for goodness. And that's just a really interesting story. Katie, I really appreciate just the depth of your answers and how present you are with me in this conversation as I've kind of pummeled you with questions about these characters. But this is the part of the podcast where I really just turn it over to you. And I invite all of my guests to write and read a love letter either to their younger selves or to their readers. So I would love for you to share your love letter.
Okay, I will. And also, it's been just great to have this conversation. And I feel way more relaxed than I did at the beginning. My nerves is killing me, but we did good. So
You did good.
here we are. I decided to write my love letter to my readers. So, to my readers, if there were greater words that could be said, I'd say them. In fact, this letter is my personal challenge to myself to do just that. I mean, as an author, surely I can relay my deepest gratitude with words, right? Like many aspiring artists, I've always said that if just one person liked my book, I'd be happy. And what do you know? You guys said I'll raise you that little bit of happiness and throw in a few hundred more. For the longest, I thought maybe this is a fluke. Maybe it's just this group of people I found who happen to like my story. There are probably a million other groups that won't. But then the number started to grow and climb, and it became impossible to continue to believe the lies the imposter syndrome kept trying to feed me. Whenever times got hard and I felt like quitting, it was you all who shouted your love and support and gave me your patience and kind words of encouragement. The absolute joy you all have filled me with can't be measured, and my appreciation can't be quantified. But I hope you know if I were to tell the little girl who wanted to write stories that I had a fan base, that there were people that not only enjoyed my first book, but who are fans for life simply for how I storytell, I'm sure that little girl would call me a liar. I struggled today, not sure who I should dedicate my love letter to, but I saw a comment that read, "If Katie's writing it, I'm reading it." And I thought, wow, I have readers like that. Readers who have that level of faith in me. And I need them to know how much that means to me. I need them and everyone like them to know what that's done for my soul. And I need to express that love I have in my favorite medium. When I call you all readers, I mean it as something more than just someone who read my book, but people who partook in a journey with me. There are many writers in the world, many talented authors who can weave words together, but to see value in my method of storytelling, to hear my voice and be touched by my words, is a feeling I can't even begin to describe or convey. It's an unreal experience that I can only hope I somehow find a way to repay. But for now, I guess I can only say thank you. Thank you so much for giving me every version of myself, past, present, and future, a place in your life, if even for a short time. It means more than the world. It means to the edge of the universe and back. Because of you, I mattered. And everyone deserves to feel that way at least once in this lifetime. So rest assured, you matter to me. I love you, my readers.
Katie, thank you so much for such a thoughtful letter. And as one of those readers who just sees myself being with you for a lifetime. I'm really glad that we quote unquote met this summer and I was able to just start this journey of reading your work.
I'm so glad. I was really happy when you reached out and wanted to do the podcast. I was like, little old me.
Oh, I was full on Sydney Sinclair. I was stalking you on social media. I was sending you messages like, we have to connect. I really want to talk to you. So, how do you like your readers to connect or reach out to you? And it sounds like an obvious question, right? We all have social media, but do you have a newsletter, a website, Facebook group, social media? What do you prefer?
Yeah, so I'd probably say hands down the easiest is my Instagram, and that's just because all of my links are there to literally everything from my email to even Pinterest. So, yeah, send me a DM if you ever want to like get in touch, but I also have my newsletter that I release at least once a month. I aim for two, but I always do at least once a month. I also have a Facebook group. It's called Cureton Cartel. So join the cartel if you feel so inclined. I like to share all my writing process and where I am with stuff, and I'd like to send my art there first. So definitely join the readers group on Facebook.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure to put all of these links in the show notes. So if anyone's interested, you can just click through and find KD on these platforms. Well, Katie, I really appreciate you spending this time with me. I have loved getting to know you. I thoroughly enjoyed our pre production call, and I really enjoyed this podcast. And I can't wait to talk to you about the rest of this series. I hope you'll join us again sometime soon.
Of course, I would love to, if only to just be less nervous.
We'll just chit chat
I'll
next
have
time.
experience now. Get in the game.
We went through every worst case scenario today with technology. So I feel like next time it couldn't even be any better than this interview. It'll be great. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Love Letters and Books. And if you're interested in being a guest on Love Letters and Books, suggesting your favorite author, or just want to write in an original love letter to yourself or someone else to be read on air, please send me an email at lovelettersandmixtapes@gmail.com.